Good afternoon. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining our November webinar. I've been really looking forward to this one, focusing in on our low carbon leaders initiative. And this is around net zero retrofits. So tip of the spear, bleeding edge. You can pick the hyperbolic metaphor, but these guys are doing amazing work. And it's been a lot of fun to figure out this puzzle, figure out roadmaps to take existing buildings to net zero over time. And of course, there's so much happening, and we're recording or broadcasting this today during COP27. So the global conversation happening against the backdrop of our domestic developments with the Inflation Reduction Act and huge historic investment in climate action and energy transition, all happening. And very proud of the work that our partners are doing in this space, and really look forward to next year and growing this segment of the program. So today is going to be a conversational format as per usual. And my name is Dave Hodgins. I am the Executive Director of the LA Better Buildings Challenge. So I'll be tour guide today. I'll do a quick overview of the program after some housekeeping, and then we'll get into a conversation with two of our initial cohort of low carbon leaders. Really amazing speakers today, and appreciate them joining. As always, I want to thank our funder, the LA Department of Water and Power. They are making huge, speaking of historic investments, in an equitable energy transition and decarbonizing the supply side as well as the demand side. And this is all moving together, and tons of related policy happening. I should also note that Building and Safety just in the last week put forward a recommendation that all new construction starting in April of next year is net zero. So existing buildings figuring that out will be next. And so want to thank DWP as always for their continued support. I can't believe we've been doing this work for over 10 years now. A few housekeeping items. As usual, the attendee lines will be muted. I do hope we'll have lots of questions, and we'll have some time for that at the end, time permitting. As always, we'll get the slides out along with the recording, key takeaways, links, and cool resources. Appreciate your feedback as always. So with that, we can start getting into the agenda for today, which is, as I said, an overview, just a little context for what is the Low Carbon Leaders initiative within the LABBC, and then get into a discussion. We've got some great speakers today, and I've been really enjoying the work we've been doing together. And so this will be a peek into what we've been learning, what we're seeing, challenges as we go. Because again, this is new, right? This is new, looking out this far and this comprehensively for most organizations. And so I hope you'll all find it interesting, and that you will join the conversation, is my hope. So low carbon leaders, this is our version of the overall Department of Energy wide focus on net zero retrofits. Here in LA, we have created this as a subset for partners within LABBC that want to really home in on a few buildings and chart out pathways to net zero. So on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about that. So again, this is a long-term planning effort. And we've also got collaboration from the Department of Energy and the National Renewable Energy Lab, who are some of the best minds, right, aside from the guys we have on the call today, in this space, trying to figure this out and develop strategies to take all different types of buildings to net zero over time. So this is a team effort, very much so. In terms of the commitments that we look for to participate, this is not super different than probably what a lot of you have already committed to, right? And certainly for LABBC partners. But this is a commitment to net zero carbon by 2050. we better do that, or this is going to be a pretty unpleasant, unrecognizable place we will be trying to live. But so how are we going to do that? And what a wedge analysis is, we'll get into that, but that's looking at how do these multiple strategies fit together, stack together to show through this combination, how do we get to zero over time? What we also look for is process transparency, and this is part of what today is about. What are the challenges? What are the wins? What are we learning as we go? And then working with us to develop and document strategies. So we thought partner, we bring in DOE and NREL, our own technical advisors, the utilities, and document what we're learning as we go. And the result is what we call an action plan at the end of a 2-year planning process, because it does take time, as you'll hear, to work through all the different options that we're considering under this framework, to publish an action plan with the Department of Energy that talks about all of this. And we're going to go into the elements of that today. But the idea is that this becomes a roadmap for the organization, for the company to use as they look further out than may have been the case in the past, and deeper towards net zero. So our initial cohort shown here has been really exciting collaboration so far. And again, I'm looking to grow this. So please do reach out. My contact information will be at the end if you don't already have it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them today, ask us offline. We want to grow this and see, really all of our LABBC partners part of this, because this is where it's headed, right? Both, the market, legislatively, and it's obviously needed just on a sustainability and global, environmental scale, as I think we all see. This is a snapshot of the national partners that are signed up directly with the Department of Energy, and it just coincidentally happens to look like the United States minus Florida. Didn't fit on there, so that was kind of funny. But great broad participation, both across property types and types of organizations. And so again, I hope to see more and more LABBC partner logos on this big logo slide, because you guys are doing amazing work. So just the last bit of context before we get into our conversation for today. This is a graphic of what we call the priority waterfall. And this is something that our friends at DOE provided to us to help aid in the thinking. And there's not a whole lot new here in terms of, the priority, efficiency is the first fuel. I think everybody that's been in the space for a while is on the same page with that. With RECs and offsets being the idea is that sort of the last resort to zero out whatever you can't get to through efficiency, beneficial electrification, on-site, off-site renewables, and so forth, all the way down. And so this provides a framework for us to think about where are the different buckets of reductions going to come from for a given asset. We've got, as you'll hear today, different space constraints, different opportunities where we've got central plant versus distributed systems, roof space, all of these factors that are site specific that come into play, and organization specific, that will ultimately inform the total solution. So this is what we call a priority waterfall. It's kind of a wonky term, but we'll get into the examples today, and this will start to make sense. And then I talked about an action plan. And so the action plan is a document that really lays out in a structured way the priority waterfall. So where do you think that the emissions reductions are going to come from? It also has sections around barriers, which we'll talk about today, and implementation strategies, areas of opportunity. How are you going to get there with some specificity? What's the priority of these in terms of time and also magnitude, and puts it all into one document. what we've done that's unique, I think, to our program is we've converted this into a dashboard. And so this is interactive. We use this to store documents, share meeting notes and action items. And so when you join Low Carbon Leaders, you see a snapshot of Douglas Emmett's here today, and we'll be hearing from Barry representing Douglas Emmett today. That's a screenshot of what the dashboard looks like and just helps us stay organized and collaborative throughout the whole engagement. So with that, I'm excited to introduce our speakers for today. With us from Boston, so please excuse if you hear any loud cursing in the background. We've got Barry from Servidyne, and I'll let each of them introduce themselves, but Servidyne's a longtime consultant to Douglas Emmett. So Barry will talk more about that relationship and his role there. And Doug Reinheimer with Paramount Studios, Paramount Pictures, who I will also let introduce himself. So if we could go to, actually, let's start there. And Barry, if you want to go first, we have a slide with just some summary information on kind of Douglas Emmett's portfolio and the 2 assets that you guys selected for inclusion in this pilot. If you could just tell us, a little bit about your role, your background, and then we'll get into some more questions. Over to Doug and into the questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dave. And welcome, everybody. I'm looking forward to the conversation. So yeah, I'm Barry Abramson. I'm a principal at Servidyne, which is an energy and sustainability consulting firm. And we've been working with Douglas Emmett for over 20 years, helping them along the path, which started out focused on energy efficiency and lighting retrofits and things like that back in the late 90s, and kind of moved to a broader sustainability approach, and now really focused on decarbonization. And so I'm in a consulting role. I sit on the Douglas Emmett Sustainability Committee along with their top management and technical staff. And so this program has really, been a vehicle to, guide the process of looking at decarbonization. And when Douglas Emmett was invited to participate, the criteria was to really select some pilot properties. Douglas Emmett owns a lot of buildings throughout Southern California. It's one of the largest real estate owners in the region. But they picked 2 properties to kind of look at as part of this process. One is Warner Center Towers in Woodland Hills, which is one of their largest properties. It's a multiple building, several office towers totaling about 2 million square feet. And the other property is Sherman Oaks Galleria, which is a multi-use complex with several office buildings and retail and a movie theater and restaurants and things like that. And so they're different properties, and they're being looked at as pilots within the pilot. So Douglas Emmett is a pilot participant overall, but then for Douglas Emmett, these are pilot properties that hopefully lessons will be learned to spread much broader throughout their portfolio.
It's perfect. Thanks, Barry. And we'll come back to some questions about how you guys selected these buildings, how we see this scaling. And so that's a great preview of where we want to go. Doug, same question. You want to introduce yourself and your role at Paramount?
Well, number one, thanks for having me here today, Dave. I appreciate the time. So my primary responsibilities lies in the Paramount Pictures lot. It's a 62-acre campus just north of downtown Los Angeles. And as a Paramount Global, how that fits in, we've got over 200 sites worldwide, but it's very similar to Barry. We came into this as a pilot, but also our campus is a little bit of a pilot within the pilot in that respect. But we're treating the whole campus, kind of equally, because of, we leverage how large it is, but we get a lot of benefit there. But I've been helping them out at the Paramount lot here for about 14 years. My career spans about 3 decades in various roles, from design, process controls, electrical design, project management, and now I'm responsible for the facility operations and the studio services. So very much a service-oriented location in that respect. So some of the challenges are very similar to others. We've got, we've been here 110 years, so we've got some of that. That also offers opportunity as well as we look through this. So that's a little bit about where we're at and where we're going in that respect.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so now we'll start transitioning into some discussion and some questions to tease out more about what you guys are doing. But before I start zooming into the specifics, there's a little more, and we can just kind of bounce back and forth between you guys about your organization's approach and motivation around energy net zero. You can take that how you want. But Douglas, Emmett, Barry, I mean, if you could go first. Well, I know, my bad. But yeah, if you could talk about Douglas Emmett's approach to this opportunity.
Sure. So I think Douglas Emmett has had a commitment to sustainability for a couple of decades, and has implemented a lot of initiatives across the portfolio, again focused mainly on energy and water efficiency. But I think part of what spurred them into this program was what is spurring everyone now, which is the compulsion to decarbonize the building sector, seeing that as a big part of our overall global challenge. And so entering into this program spurred them to make a public commitment to net zero carbon by 2050, which was a prerequisite to join the program, but it was a good spurt to actually do that. At the same time, one victory. At the same time, Douglas Emmett is primarily a real estate company and has to run buildings, and there are multiple challenges to doing that, and certainly those challenges have increased over the last few years with everything that has been going on in the real estate industry. So this isn't a sole focus, it's an important focus, but it really has to be looked at in terms of how does this fit into the overall goals and requirements of running a large real estate organization.
Right. So real estate investment trust, they're a REIT, and so I think you're alluding to COVID and all the the market dislocation that's happening now. We're in this rising rate environment, so very much very important context, right, for all of this work that we're developing and that you're helping put in front of the executive leadership. So Doug, I would venture to say that you are not a real estate company. So how would you characterize Paramount's history, approach, and how you're thinking about this now in the context of your business?
I think we were thinking about it long before it was the main topic in the news here lately. You think all the way back to Al Gore bringing awareness to people and our participation in Inconvenient Truth, and more recently Inconvenient Truth 2. It is happening. And that's kind of at the macro level, is the education part to get people motivated to make that change. But more at a micro level within the organization, is that we saw it as we provide a service to people, so it is an operational efficiency conversation with us as well, because everybody benefits from that. That's probably one of the main drivers, and we'll get into that a little more in our waterfall explanation. But at that level, it's very important to us. Production wise, we are not necessarily here at the lot majority of the time, so we have a mobility factor that we have to address, and I think there's been a lot of movement there. Then some tools that we can talk about a little bit later that we can help move the needle, but it's not going to take one tool, and I think that's what a lot of people are struggling with, and hopefully we can give them some insight there on how we're addressing that. But that's the macro level. Is there's a lot of movement there in the education part, and then the micro is making sure that we're running our facility, the 62 acres efficient as possible.
Yep, absolutely. So circling back to the kind of snapshot we had of the portfolios, or in Doug's case, it's almost like a portfolio, just the lot itself. But Barry, could you talk us through a little bit more about the thought process, for others on the call who are thinking about, okay, I've got a portfolio. It's local, it's regional, it's national. What's the sort of set of filters that you applied as you thought about with Douglas Emmett selecting the assets that you did for inclusion in this?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that was important was to look at that waterfall and think about the different components of the waterfall and how those would come into play at a particular property. And we wanted to pick properties where we could actually invoke as many of those buckets or wedges or whatever you want to call it as possible, so we could kind of get our here's another feet wet in the different aspects of this, so that it wasn't just honed in on one particular thing. We wanted to be able to learn lessons from these particular properties that could be applied across the board. So looking at, we wanted properties that still had remaining significant energy efficiency opportunity, also good potential for on-site renewables, and electrification challenges in particular. So I think those three things were important criteria.
And since you made the pun, I'll go ahead and mention that we're also have been looking at water opportunities with you, and I don't want to gloss over, just because it rained the other day. The drought is very real, and it's not going away, and so that's also part of this. I just want to note that for the audience, and part of all of our work, and that DWP has temporarily tripled the incentives for all water conservation programs. So it's a great time to be looking at cooling towers and innovative irrigation strategies and so forth. So I just wanted to footnote that, since Barry gave me a wedge to do so. Oh man. Doug, could you talk about how you think about the lot in the context maybe of the broader portfolio? And I understand it's big and distributed, but kind of spin that question to make sense for you.
Sure. I think actually it was a little bit easier for us because we did have we have 120 structures here. So for us, when we a lot of it was infrastructure based, not just going after one building, but what's the commonality? So, 2009, we kicked off a central plant installation in different phases. So that in itself, we saw a benefit because, we've got 29 sound stages. So if this 4 sound stages are going, doesn't mean the other are. So we saw just from a diversity factor in creating the energy profile, there's a 35% less capital investment, less energy usage. So that was actually a benefit to have this scope and size to work with. Some of our buildings are smaller, they're a little bit harder to work on, but then we've got some of the, everybody asks, what type of buildings do you have? And my answer is kind of one of every kind, because we've been here so so long. So different envelopes to work with. But we knew that a centralized plant made a lot of sense from that standpoint. Also leveraging the installation of process controls and automation as we went out through that, making sure that we're scheduling that. And then a particular focus, as people are on the call, think about these questions. Do you have an operational arm for your facility? Does your operations people have the conversation with your design group before they start making changes? What's the goals? A lot of times we picked out this end goal in the carbon, but I don't know if we've necessarily come up with, okay, what do we do this year? What do we do the following year? How do we integrate that in the maintenance? And that's start where you stand. If you're making a capital investment and you're maintaining, you have opportunity to improve with, energy conservation measures now, more newer technology. And that's some of the things that your group, Dave, has introduced us to relationships with the DOE and NREL. They say, this is some of the new technology. You don't have to put it in every building, but you should maybe try it out and see what it does for you.
Right. Well, and I thought, the conversation we had the other day was interesting as we started talking about, which buildings on the lot are served by the central plant or could be, which are not or are unlikely to be in the future, and starting to segment out, where should we be looking at potential replacements or electrification or augmentation of rooftop units versus buildings that are going to be tied into the central plant. So it's almost like we're starting to segment the portfolio within the lot a little bit.
That's a really good point, because at first we said, central plant, this is a great idea. We're going to run it to all our buildings. And we realized, well, maybe it doesn't make sense to drive all this infrastructure to all the buildings. And that's when we started looking at other technologies that made a lot more sense. VRF systems, less intrusive, maybe a smaller building, things of that nature, but you can still get the connectivity to control it and schedule it in a similar fashion.
Right, and you spoke about the operational piece. So great. Well, if we could put the slides back up, we have each of your priority waterfalls kind of side by side, and I think there's some commonalities, but also some interesting differences. And I want to use this as a jumping off point for really, most of the rest of our conversation today. So I think I explained what this was at the outset, but just to recap, this is a priority waterfall. So top priority, the first fuel is energy efficiency, and then working on down the line, less direct sources of emissions down to RECs and offsets. So back to Barry to talk about how you thought about this, and as it lays across the different buckets of opportunity. And then I think then I'll go to Doug and we can bounce some questions off of this.
Okay, sure. So, just to kind of piggyback off your last conversation, Doug's points, one of the things that I think is different about approaching this decarbonization strategy is that it's not assuming that everything's going to happen at the same time. And like, we're used to doing energy audits, for years and years, where you do an energy audit on a building, you come up with a list of measures, and then you put it forward for implementation through whatever economic criteria is used, and then you want everything implemented that can be implemented. This is different because some of these things are going to have attractive returns immediately, and you're going to want to move forward right away. Some things, the technology may not even be available yet, and we're just putting a placeholder in, hoping that products come on the market that can fit that need sometime in the next 5 or 10 years. So there's a mix of things here. And so what comes together is a long-term plan, not super long-term, but because we know we need to reach the decarbonization goal as soon as possible, but it's also not, okay, this is what we're going to do immediately. It's a little bit broader of a view. And so when we look at the priorities, energy efficiency typically, is going to have at least a portion of it is going to have a good return and should be implemented immediately, but it's also going to encompass capital replacements and things that may have to happen at certain points in a building's life cycle. For an office building, there are different trigger points. There's a point when there's tenant turnover. You can do a lot of things at that point that you may not be able to do any given time. Then there's also a capital planning budget that may mean that chillers are going to be up for replacement at a certain point, or boilers or things like that. So all of that is kind of a backdrop to looking at this waterfall. So the interesting thing to me at this point in the program is that we did an initial assessment of the different priority elements and assigning percentages of how we would get to zero in each of those line items. And then we just recently redid that based on what we've learned and the investigation that's been done up to this point, and there's been a little bit of a shift, mainly in one particular row of this table. So initially, when we looked at what is the energy efficiency opportunity, we said, okay, Warner Center Towers is about a 40% chunk because there's oval chillers, there's a significant amount of the tenant space still has fluorescent lighting, those kinds of things, very significant straight up efficiency opportunity. Sherman Oaks Galleria, some similar opportunities, but not to the same magnitude. In terms of electrification, both of these properties have gas-fired boilers on the buildings, primarily to provide space heating in perimeter reheat systems. So they don't use a ton of gas, but we have to figure out how we're going to get rid of that on-site fuel combustion through electrification, and that represented 10% at one of the properties and 5% at the other. On-site renewables, this is where things have kind of shifted fairly dramatically. We did a very initial high-level take on what we thought the potential was for solar PV at both of these properties, and we had sort of pegged 20% of the carbon picture at the Warner Center Towers and 30% at Sherman Oaks Galleria. Since then, and through the course of the assistance that Dave and his group have provided, we've been able to engage with some PV vendors to get some real numbers developed, and it turned out that the solar PV potential was much more significant than we originally had thought. And we can talk later maybe about how that unfolded and what the financial implications are. But because both of these properties have huge parking decks, putting solar on top of the parking decks has a great potential for offsetting a larger chunk of the building's electricity than we had originally thought, with Sherman Oaks Galleria being 50%, which is pretty incredible. And then the last thing I'll just mention briefly is the grid integration row. And I think a question had already come in on the chat about why isn't storage part of the waterfall. Grid integration is the piece where storage fits in. And even though it doesn't necessarily represent a set percent reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, it's incredibly important as a contribution to the overall decarbonization and the ability to electrify across the grid, is for buildings to be able to be good grid citizens. And we really didn't know what that meant for these properties at the beginning of the program. And again, through the assistance and technical support and resources brought to bear, we've now determined that there's two areas of good potential. One is battery storage at each of these properties in conjunction with the solar installations, and the other is demand response, where we were introduced to the LADWP's demand response program, which is a very attractive financial opportunity and a very doable program to implement demand response in these buildings. So I'll stop there and hand it over back to Doug. But I think this is really the key to this whole program, is sort of working through this waterfall and seeing how that evolves as we learn more.
I think that's a good point that Barry made initially, is, just because you start at one certain point doesn't mean that it's going to be exactly that at the end. And I think I heard this quote that if you're working a 5-year plan or a 5-year-old plan, that you're probably working the wrong plan. So we try and revisit all the newer technology on an annual basis at a minimum, and sometimes even more frequent than that based on the environment. But ours, our waterfall is really all built about efficiency, but the efficiency part has a lot of components to that. It's integration into your maintenance functions. It's making sure you have the operational arm with that, making sure you're putting in the right technology as well. My baseline was 2008, so we've been doing this for a while, 14 years or so. If someone would have said, oh, your electrical grid purchases are going to be down 55% and a media company that the power densities are increasing, I wouldn't have believed it. But you know, everything seems a little bit impossible before you get started until you do it. So we've seen a lot of really good gains, and I was trying to think how to put this in context of how we look at the campus. And if people relate to data centers, and one of the things they've happened at data centers, they're virtualized environment. They don't have one resource dedicated for one task. And if you think about it this way, that's the way each one of our buildings are a dedicated resource, but we virtualize this studio campus to say we put the resources to the building or the process that takes up those resources almost on a minute by second basis. And that's how we've been able to make a lot of gains on that, you know, the diversity factor, or, you know, just the operational resources that are needed for it. So that's one way of thinking about it, you know, creating that analogy to a data center virtualization comment. Electrification, we do have the advantage of living in Southern California, so I don't see that as a big a deal for us. But I did want to mention one of the newer technologies, and your standard heat pump, which, you know, creates the heat, but we're looking at technology that's not just doing the heat for us. So it has a temperature range that you can provide cooling, and it's a CO2 refrigerant. So that's one of the newer technologies that we've had a chance to do, and we're, you know, doing some piloting right now to see if that's going to vet out to be a long-term solution for us. On-site renewables, you know, one of the things that we're really proud of at Paramount Studios is the historic feel and look, and trying to integrate solar to make sure that, you know, that fits within the fabric of the studio lot, as well as everything could be under camera at a certain point, whether it be inside the buildings or outside the buildings. So that's something that we're certainly evaluating, and how that impacts the overall operations. But I also want to mention not just electrification, the things that I think hydrogen, most recently, even at a federal level and at a state level, in integrating a hydrogen hub infrastructure is something that we're evaluating. We currently have natural gas microturbines now that produce 30% of our power on site. But we can also take and train hydrogen and still maintain those natural gas turbines with up to 30% hydrogen. So there's opportunities there. Even to Barry's point, it's like you may not start out with this, but there may be an opportunity when you look at the technology to integrate your existing processes for improvement. And our grid integration, we view that as a demand response. We've been participating in DWP's demand response since their pilot program, and I think that's been ongoing for about 5 years. And I have to say and congratulate DWP, because it helped us focus as a group, not just one trade or one department, but as a campus environment, reacting to, and Barry said about a grid stewardship and being a good citizen of that. And we took it even to the next level. We've integrated our own demand response, even that with a tighter criteria that DWP is asking us for. So that made us think about that operational arm even deeper, to how we can get into the scheduling, how we can integrate our process controls. So that's kind of a high level perspective of where we created the waterfall in our thought process.
Those were great overviews. I want to double click on a couple of the ideas that you guys have brought up, or buckets in here. But yeah, I would just say that anyone who hasn't fully looked at the demand response program absolutely should. And I mean, we were a hair's breadth from a pretty gnarly blackout this summer. It's not going to be any cooler next summer. And so DWP has some big targets to grow that program. And you know what Doug and Barry are saying is really consistent with what I've heard from other partners of ours that are part of that program, is that you uncover ideas that make sense to do all the time. And it does, you know, foster collaboration. And then of course you're seeing demand savings in addition to consumption savings, which has a ripple effect through the bill for the whole year, and they pay you. So it's a kind of a win-win. Yeah, and I also, maybe this is a question, maybe it's a statement, but what I'm hearing is that this process is helping to maybe get into a little more detail on projects that may be further out than you would otherwise devote that much attention to. I guess, Barry, I'm thinking about some of the the chiller projects and boilers and things that where you're aware that there could be an end of life type of emergency issue at some point, but starting now to really understand, okay, what will we buy in the future, and kind of slotting that in a way that in the traditional sort of energy audit, okay, slice off everything above a 2-year payback and forget about it. It's shifting that a little bit, it sounds like.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. There's a, specifically looking at chillers and boilers. So
yeah,
one of the things
guys.
we want to make sure coming out of this program is that we already have thought through the decision process so that when it does come up to replace, either in a crisis situation or in a capital plan, we don't just do a knee-jerk replace in kind or make a bad decision because we didn't have the time to do the analysis and the preparation to make that decision. So, obviously with chillers, we want to get the most efficient equipment possible, but also there's, as Doug mentioned, there's technology implications of trying to electrify the heating side, and there's opportunities with heat pumps that might provide cooling as well as heating, depending on the configuration of the systems, that we want to have kind of worked out so that we don't blow it when some of this capital is ready to be spent or needs to be spent, because those expenditures are then going to be putting equipment in place for the next 20 or 30 years. And so an interesting aspect of the boiler side is that these buildings, I think, are very typical of large office buildings in Southern California with hot water reheat systems and relatively small gas-fired hot water boilers that supply those. And we're really looking forward to figuring out the solution to that from a heat pump standpoint, in terms of what products are available now, what do we think is going to come online in the future? Is there a hybrid approach? If we had to replace the boiler next year, what do we do versus having a little bit more time to get more products out there on the market? All of those questions are things that the DOE and the national labs are helping with input through this program to kind of work out the options and strategies.
Yeah, exactly. You provided us some really helpful data that we've fed on to NREL, and we're gathering that from all of the partners we're working with, and they're helping to create resource. And then I think also, and I want to come back to Doug's point about hydrogen. If we can start to coalesce or demonstrate some demand, right, that can have a pull effect, bring those technologies into existence, right, sooner than if there's sort of being if there's no perceived demand, right? So I think that's another really cool thing that you guys are doing with this. And Doug, same thing, with the hydrogen, you're calling out the potential to run your turbines off of 30% hydrogen. And I just learned the other day that there's a green hydrogen pipeline that's going to be making its way to Burbank, right? And so when we hear that, okay, Paramount's interested, who else is interested, right? There can be this network effect. I hope that's what we're trying to do here today. That creates the demand that helps to justify the investment, right? Bring the pipe, bring the technologies, into existence, because big portfolios, big customers want to buy that.
And I think that was one of my points of just being the 10% on-site renewables, when the reality is our utilities, that especially DWP and SoCalGas has been very active in pursuing a lot of these renewables, and that's what they do. You know, back to your point, making electricity and things like that is not our core business. We do what we can from a stewardship, but we also rely on our utilities to advance that for us as well.
Yep. Yep. And on the operations point, I think it was an interesting anecdote you shared the other day about. Well, I want to come back to tenants, right? Your tenants look very different, right? In these different businesses. In your case, Doug, it's productions largely in the sound stages. Those are your customer, your tenant, in you know, bigger proportion. And then Barry, it's office, it's retail there. But Doug, I wonder if you could share that anecdote about the elephant doors. Well, what is an elephant door? And what are you guys doing with your elephant doors?
Well, yeah, but elephant door got its name for the fact within our sound stages, we have very large doors, and they had to be large enough for an elephant to walk through onto the stage. So a little bit of history there. But what they're used for now is bringing in the larger sets that, you know, they do as much pre-construction, or they've already done the set one season and they're bringing the same set back the next season. So it has to be a fairly large opening. So with, you know, our central plant, one of our first, you know, categories, we're making sure the sound stages have, you know, cooling, but also there's other factors, not just the cooling, but say there's a smoke effect that's going on, being able to evacuate that in a certain amount of time, being able to produce that cooling at a very low volume of sound. So it's a, you know, it's a high volume, low velocity design for us. But when people decide that they're going to leave it, it's well documented on the local stages, as well as we communicate that verbally. We give them, after 10 minutes of this elephant door being open, that the cooling will shut off, you know. And people say, well, we need to move it. We're happy to cool the sound stage, which is a really big box for us, but we can't cool the streets. So that's one of the things is everybody's open to it. Is back to that education component. This is kind of our expectation. This is the way it works with trying to decrease our carbon footprint. So it's almost everybody's like, they understand it. It's a new process. As you make state changes for efficiency, everybody needs to come with you.
Yeah, and it sounded like, you know, the productions, the tenants have responded well to that. And a lot of other studios that we're in conversations with are sort of like, ooh, I don't want to upset, you know, the client, if you will. But it sounds like, you know, they're kind of hip to not air conditioning the street.
Right, and I think the messaging is that we only get better when we make change, and it's best if we can do that together.
Yeah. What about for Douglas Emmett, various, you know, obviously different business, the conversation about, you know, what you can touch, what you cannot touch, you know, returns on investment, driven by leases, all that good stuff.
Yeah, well, I think it's a complicated topic. I think one of the interesting things is that some of the pressure to do this kind of stuff is coming from tenants. And so it really depends on who the tenants are and what organizations they're with, because some, you know, may be an office part of a larger organization that has made their own decarbonization commitments. And so they're very interested in the carbon footprint of the building they're in, because they have a proportionate share of that they're reporting up to their structure. And so there's some motivation coming from there. On the other hand, you know, you know, obviously there are tenants that would rather not engage in, you know, in this realm, just want to have a comfortable office to work in. But, you know, so there is a mix, but I think there's an onus on the landlord to provide education and encouragement and motivation, you know, through various means to the tenant base.
And then totally, and a couple of things, brain farts. You know, I wonder how, to the extent that any of the tenants are publicly traded companies, right? We've got the SEC rules coming down. And so, real estate is going to be part of your scope 2 or 3, I should know this. But you're part of their supply chain, right? And so the tenants who are super serious about that and whose investors, retail or otherwise, I think that's going to start, well, that's the intent, right, of that whole effort, is to inform investors, drive those decisions. And I forgot the other part I was going to say. Doug, it looked like you were going to add something there.
No, I was going to add, it's like, in the waterfall that I saw Barry shared, that they had recs in there. So I think being transparent with some of those goals to your tenants offers an opportunity for them to participate at that level as well. So I don't know, because Paramount Global is there. This is one of the few larger owned properties. A lot of theirs are leased. So that's why I was really interested in hearing how Barry and Douglas Emmett handles that, because we're trying to move the needle as well. But how does that work? And I think there should be some more. I know there's green leases and some other developments happening. I think that would be a great tool to vet out a little bit more for organizations.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and we're seeing this for both sides. So we get hired, by a Douglas Emmett to help, and then a tenant asks what is our carbon footprint for this floor of this building, and we help do those calculations. And then we work for some organizations that lease space, and we try to get that same information from the landlord in those buildings. I think right now the big effort is to just get the data. That's hard enough. I don't think that it's gotten to the point of the pressure to reduce those numbers. It's the difficulty is just getting the numbers right now. But once those numbers, and as Dave said, the SEC, regulatory requirements and compliance are driving more of this. And once that process of the data acquisition is more of a settled question, then people can start actually understanding what those numbers mean and how to move them.
Yep. And I think the question of RECs is an interesting one. And I mean, another way of thinking about that is, DWP offers a green power program, where you can pay, I think it's 3 cents per kWh premium, and then you're procuring green power. And they're going through some changes right now, I think, to make the accounting a little easier for all of the reasons that we're talking about now. People need to get a handle on how does this break down floor by floor, building by building on a campus or a scattered site, so that they can then start making these decisions. But I think that with some of the improvements that they're making, that's going to be an interesting option where, RECs, they're so abstract, right? They may be far away, they may be hard to defend, right? They may not be real, and we're reading a lot about that. I wonder if that's, certainly it's more local, and maybe more direct. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. I think
just to throw in a quick clarification on that, I think it's not there is a percentage in that row of the waterfall, but that's more of a catch-all leftover category. I don't think Douglas Emmett is interested in really buying their way out of this situation. So we're trying to get to that row down to 0. But it's just sort of a leftover category. And I think, one of the challenges in the industry now is that I think most of the organizations who have declared that they've made it to net zero have done it by buying a bunch of RECs. And there's a validity to that, but it's not the ideal approach in the medium or long term. And so another really value of participating in this program is really trying to figure out how to get that number down as close to 0 as possible.
Well, we're going to shift to audience Q&A here in a second, but before we do that, I just wanted to throw out an idea that I've been thinking about, and I think I may have mentioned it to you once, Barry, but obviously we don't want to see companies just buying their way out and then not doing anything to actually reduce the emissions, just to claim that, okay, I paid, we're done. But something I'd love to do as we look at some of the different, bigger capital projects like the chillers and boilers is, those are going to get you big chunks of savings. Like, what if, and I want to work with you guys on this in a theoretical sense, if we were to buy RECs or we were to buy green power, and think about that as almost like a self-imposed carbon tax, right? That you want to get out from under because you do intend, you guys have a track record, right? Which will continue of making investments to actually achieve reductions. How might that impact the ROI? As if you factor in the reduced reliance on RECs or green power purchases, along with energy and O&M savings that would come from doing the project and any incentives. So just like as another layer of value that gets created. But anyway, lots to dig into, and I think we have some questions from the audience. So I want to use the last couple minutes for those. We touched on energy storage broadly, but I think we were talking about solar battery integrated storage. There's a question about thermal energy storage as a way of shifting cooling demands. Have either of you guys looked at that either on these properties that we're talking about or other projects that you guys have talked about? And then recently too, I think this is coming up on a lot of other projects, I should say, for us too. So it's a great question.
Go ahead, Barry.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. One of the Sherman Oaks Galleria actually has an existing chill water storage system, and that's another reason we picked that property, because we thought it would be an interesting case to try to figure out how that fit into the overall picture. And this is a 1980s thermal storage system, chill water storage design that was kind of typical and a fad back in the 80s. It's still working, which is pretty amazing and a testament to the maintenance folks that have kept it going. One of the interesting things is that we're anticipating that because the peak periods are going to shift likely from mid-afternoon on weekdays, which they are still now in DWP territory. And so the way the thermal storage is operating is to avoid running the chillers during that period, that we're going to probably need to shift that once there's a lot of solar on grid and that peak shifts into the evening, as it has already done in Southern California Edison territory, that we're going to need to change the entire operating strategy of the chill water storage plant to match that grid situation.
We actually, years ago, before I came, I guess there was a thermal energy storage, and we looked at that very closely. But what we decided is, with our central plant, and we have some very large pipe in the ground, that is our thermal storage, and we leverage that almost on a daily basis, and we're able to change that schedule at will. So we do use thermal storage, but we didn't call out an individual project for that. It was just part of the central plant implementation.
These fads from the 80s, they're durable, aren't they? Great. Well, we're right at time, and we could keep going, but I want to thank you both and just really look forward to continuing to work together and appreciate you guys joining today, and for all your work. You guys are just kicking butt.
Thanks.
So thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the program. It's really spurred a lot of thinking and a lot of planning that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Absolutely, I second that.
Awesome. That's awesome to hear, and I'll relay that to the team. We're working really hard and alongside you guys. And well, a couple of key takeaways. I won't read all these, but I think we really hit these. Efficiency first, right? That's how we're going to get to net zero most quickly and most cost efficiently, both at the site level and as a city. All options on the table. It's been really cool and fun to look at all these different things with you guys and how they fit over time, and taking this longer view. I think this is a shift. It's easy for us to get into a monthly or quarterly or next year type of mindset, but it's a journey. So I think we have a quote, as I like to end with. This time we got a great American philosopher, but yeah, don't go where the path may lead, go instead where there is no path, right? And leave a trail. And that's what you guys are doing. So thanks again. And thanks everybody for joining, and look forward to a great holiday season and a great year ahead. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.